Welcome to the Deep Dive. We unpack complex topics, try to give you the essential insights. Today, we're looking at the Coeur d'Alene region in northern Idaho. Now, this area was recently in the news, sadly, for a tragic incident on Canfield Mountain. And often when these things happen, we look at them in isolation. But sometimes, to really grasp a place, the forces shaping it, it helps to look back, way back. So that's our mission today. We're journeying back to the late 19th century, to the really dramatic mining wars of the Coeur d'Alene region. We want to explore that tumultuous past, see what patterns, what legacies might still be echoing today, maybe it's some context for the region's complexities.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how the kind of foundational struggles of a place can just resonate through time. The Coeur d'Alene area, people know it as the Silver Valley. It has this incredibly rich but also really intense past, full of conflict over resources, labor, power, you name it. So diving into this history, especially those mining wars, it really does offer, I think, vital context for understanding the place, the tensions, the unique character it has even now.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Before all the industry, before the conflict, what was this Coeur d'Alene region actually like?
Well, before the boom, it was remarkably isolated, pristine, really, named after the Native American tribe there. Early accounts, they just paint this picture of incredible natural abundance. The river, transparent as cut glass, mountains covered in these dense evergreen forests, streams alive with trout and other fish. You could apparently see thousands of them in the clear water. It sounds almost unbelievable. There was a Father Nicholas Point, ran the mission there. He wrote, perhaps nowhere else does so small an area contain such a variety of wildlife. Tribal members filling canoes with fish in just a couple of hours, hunters bringing back hundreds of deer. Even as late as 1883, you had one prospector bragging he caught 247 trout in one day.
Wow, 247 trout. That paints a picture, a true natural paradise, like you said. But that tranquility, obviously, it didn't last. What was the spark? What changed everything so dramatically?
Right, it changed fast. The beginning was, subtle at first, late 1883. The Northern Pacific Railroad, they were always looking for ways to get more passengers, right? So they published this brochure called In the Gold Fields of the Coeur d'Alene. This was after a guy named A.J. Pritchard found some gold in a creek up on the North Fork, and boom, within months, maybe 5,000 prospectors just poured into the valley. An instant gold rush.
Okay, so gold kicked it all off. But was that the real long-term draw, or did something else really transform the region's economy?
Not really, no. The gold rush itself, pretty short-lived, actually. A lot of the gold was just too hard to get at for, individual miners with pans and sluice boxes. Buried deep under gravel, locked in quartz rock. The real transformation, the big one, came just a few months later, May 1884. That's when they found these incredibly rich silver-lead-zinc ores along the South Fork of the river.
Ah, okay. Silver and lead. That sounds more like the Silver Valley name.
Exactly. This is where Coeur d'Alene became truly one of the richest mining areas in the world. You have these huge mines Spring the Tiger, Morning, Gold Hunter, Poorman, Sullivan, and the massive Bunker Hill mine, found by Noah Kellogg in 1885. That became legendary. By 1891, something like 26 out of 40 developed mines were actively producing ore. That's why the South Fork got the name the Silver Valley. But getting these metals out, totally different story from panning gold. This was hard rock mining. The ores were deep inside the mountains in these veins running through solid rock. Miners had to tunnel in, follow the veins, drill holes by hand back then, mostly by hand, pack them with explosives, blast the rock, then haul all that ore out in carts. It was incredibly arduous work. Dangerous, too. And they worked long shifts, 10 hours a day, often 13 shifts every 2 weeks. Brutal.
Yeah, I can only imagine those conditions. Underground, 10 hours. And once the ore was out, what happened? How did they process it? And what did that mean for the environment early on?
Well, initially, they'd sort the raw ore by hand, pick out the richest pieces, then haul it out by pack train, often long distances, to smelters elsewhere. But pretty quickly, within a couple of years, the bigger mines, like Bunker Hill, built their own mills right there in the valley to concentrate the ore. These early mills used what they called jig concentrators. They'd crush the ore down to like a coarse sand, mix it with water, and then use this shaking table, a jig table, to separate the heavier metal-rich bits from the lighter waste rock. But these early jigs, pretty inefficient. They recovered less than 75% of the actual metal.
Less than 75%. So a huge amount of valuable metal, and presumably other stuff too, was just left behind. What happened to all that waste?
Precisely. A lot was lost. And that waste material, the jig tailings, and the really fine stuff called slimes, basically rock ground into mud, it often just got dumped directly into streams or piled up right next to them. And remember, this waste still had relatively high amounts of lead, zinc, other metals in it. Plus, all this mining needed wood. Lots of wood. For timbering inside the mines, for building railroads, for fuel, for the towns springing up. So you had massive logging happening at the same time. Widespread deforestation across the whole area.
So, okay, you've got deforestation, increasing runoff, and rivers getting clogged with metal-laden mine waste. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. These two things, the waste dumping and the deforestation, they had immediate severe environmental impacts. More runoff from the bare hills, combined with the tailings filling up the river channels, it led to floods, annual floods over the riverbanks, and the flood levels got higher each year as more waste piled up. By 1900, tailings covered huge areas of the floodplains. They'd even washed all the way down to Lake Coeur, affecting maybe 25,000 acres along the South Fork and the main river.
25,000 acres. That quickly. What were people saying? What was the human impact, the environmental toll back then?
Oh, people downstream noticed right away. Residents started complaining. Their livestock, their crops, they said the water and the mud were toxic. They even had terms for it. Leaded horses, leaded cows, leaded dogs, leaded chickens, even leaded fish. There's one resident's diary from that time. She wrote about her family cat going into fits after drinking the bad water. So the consequences were very real, very tangible right from the start. Shows how fast that paradise could turn into something else entirely.
Yeah, leaded animals. That's stark. Which brings us, I guess, to the heart of this, the mining wars. With all this money pouring in, these dangerous conditions, the environmental damage starting, conflict seems almost inevitable, doesn't it?
It really does. Look, the kind of capital needed for these deep underground mines, the mills, the railroads, it was huge. Your average prospector, they were priced out pretty quickly. This created a massive power imbalance, and it led directly to conflict between the miners, the workforce, and the mine owners, the capital. This conflict shaped the region for decades. The miners themselves, they were described as a tough lot, a mix, really. Native-born Americans, immigrants from Britain, Italy, Scandinavia, working those long, exhausting, dangerous 10-hour shifts, earning maybe $3, $3.50 a day, and they only got a Sunday off every other week, not much time for anything else. So their demands for better conditions were, deeply felt.
Okay, so the stage is set. What were the specific demands? What pushed things towards open confrontation?
Well, by 1891, the miners had managed to secretly organize unions in basically all the major mines. They wanted better pay, sure, but also things like basic healthcare provisions and, crucially, safer working conditions. The big player, Bunker Hill Mine, they resisted strongly. And they didn't just resist alone. They organized the other mine owners into something called the Mine Owners Protective Association, the MOA, specifically to fight the unions. And that kicked off the Coeur d'Alene mining wars, a really brutal struggle that lasted on and off for about a decade.
So more than just a labor dispute then, what turned it into, well, wars? What made it so violent and protracted?
Oh, much more than a simple dispute. It became a full-blown class war. Deep economic grievances, corporate power versus organized labor. And the MOA, they weren't just fighting unions, they were also battling the railroads over high shipping costs. They had power, and they used it. The conflict involved, well, everything. Armed fights, assassinations, lockouts where they'd just shut down mines to starve out the workers, and dynamiting, lots of dynamiting of mine properties. On July 11, 1892, for instance, Union miners actually used dynamite to blow up the barracks housing Pinkerton agents.
Pinkertons, the private security agents.
Yes. Yeah, the companies hired them, often to infiltrate unions, act as spies, break strikes, so the miners saw them as enemies. After that bombing, the MOA went to the governor, N.B. Willey. They pressured him, successfully, to declare martial law. And that led to the creation of the infamous bullpen, basically a large, rough, outdoor prison. They rounded up hundreds of union miners, couldn't fit them in the county jail, so they just held them in this bullpen. There were even rumors, allegations that the union's own secretary was secretly a Pinkerton agent. Shows you the level of mistrust, the dirty tricks involved.
Well, a bullpen. That sounds incredibly grim. How did that work, and what did martial law actually mean for the miners?
It was grim. Men arrested without warrants, state authorities, even U.S. troops brought in. Held for days, weeks, some for up to 8 months. Ed Boyce, who was president of the Western Federation of Miners later, he called the commanding officer, General Merriam, a pusillanimous tool in the hands of the mine operators. Said Merriam confined men in a filthy barn, denied them lawyers. Apparently, Merriam also approved these infamous proclamations. Basically, if you were a miner and wanted to work, you had to publicly denounce the union, and you had to get a permit from the company doctor, Dr. Franz, who was known to be anti-union.
So effectively blacklisted if you supported the union.
Totally blacklisted. If you wanted a job after martial law, you had to swear an anti-union pledge, and it worked in the short term. By 1899, they estimated about 2,000 miners were working under this system. Only 99 of them had previously been union members. The unions were essentially broken for a time.
But you said for a time. So the miners did manage to fight back, score some victories even if they didn't last.
They did. By 1899, the main union, Western Federation of Miners, or WFM, they actually managed to reorganize. Unionize most of the mines again, except the big one, Bunker Hill and Sullivan. They held out. So April 24th, 1899, the miners demanded the standard union wage rate across the board. Bunker Hill refused to even recognize the union. What happened next was extraordinary. About 1,000 miners, described as moving with the discipline and precision of a perfectly trained military organization, they commandeered a train, loaded it with 3,000 pounds of dynamite, rode it down from the mining towns of Burke and Mullen, and they completely demolished the Bunker Hill and Sullivan concentrator mill, blew it up. Remarkably, only 2 people died in the whole thing. A very direct, very forceful action.
3,000 pounds of dynamite. That's a statement. How did the state react this time?
The reaction was swift and severe. The governor then was Frank Steinenberg. He called for federal troops again. But his language was telling. He said the troops weren't just to keep order, but, quote, to punish and totally eradicate from this community a class of criminals, end quote. They built another bullpen, just like the 1892 one, rounded up hundreds more suspects. Martial law stayed in place for 2 years this time, and the state prosecuted union leaders heavily. Paul Corcoran, secretary of one of the local unions, he was convicted of second-degree murder for a killing during the '99 riots, sentenced to 17 years. It was brutal. Eugene Debs, the socialist leader, he pointed to the horrors of Idaho as just one example of the bloody battles in America's ongoing class war, the government siding clearly with the owners.
So intense conflict on the labor front, but you mentioned the environmental damage started early too. Did that fight continue alongside the labor wars? How did the environmental struggle evolve?
It did, though for a long time, environmental protection just wasn't a priority for anyone, really. Owners or workers. Waste kept getting dumped right into the rivers. They did try some things, like building dams made of logs and planks around 1901. But the main goal there wasn't really environmental protection. It was more about trapping the suspended waste so they could maybe reclaim some valuable metals later. And anyway, big floods in 1917 and again in 1933 just wiped out those dams, releasing everything that had built up behind them.
Right, so downstream communities were still suffering. Did they have any legal recourse? Could they sue?
They tried. Farmers downstream filed lots of lawsuits from the early 1900s right up into the 1930s. They claimed the mine waste was poisoning their crops, killing their livestock. Pretty clear claims. But the Mine Owners Association, the MOA, they fought back hard in court, and they generally won. They successfully argued for the preferential status of miners' water rights, basically saying mining was more important economically and had the right to use the water even if it meant polluting it. They argued the waste was harmless, despite the evidence, and eventually they just started buying up pollution easements and overflow easements from landowners downstream, essentially paying people off to give up their right to sue over future pollution. It was a strategy to legally protect their right to pollute.
Buying the right to pollute. Wow. But did public awareness ever grow? Did anyone push back against that narrative?
Yes, it did, slowly. There was a notable effort in 1929-1930. John Ho, he was the editor of the Coeur Press. He published these really dramatic articles called The Mining District, The Valley of Death, talked about Paradise Lost, very strong language. He lobbied the state government for action, and he made a key point. He pointed to mines up in Canada that were operating profitably without dumping all their waste into rivers. His argument was basically, look, it doesn't have to be this way. You can mine responsibly and still make money.
So the argument for sustainable mining was being made even back then. Did the government start listening? Did the science catch up?
It started to. The state set up a commission. Federal studies began, and they confirmed the pollution was real and serious. Dr. M.M. Ellis from the Bureau of Fisheries studied the Coeur d'Alene River in 1932. His findings were stark. He found the river practically devoid of fish fauna, empty of fish life. His conclusion, quote, "There is but one solution, namely the exclusion of all mine wastes. Stop dumping." Around the same time, the U.S. Public Health Service found lead levels in Lake Coeur d'Alene itself were already exceeding guidelines for safe drinking water. This is the 1930s, remember, decades before the big environmental movement, but the evidence was already piling up.
And the companies. How did they react to these scientific findings, especially concerning things like lead and the air pollution from their smelters?
They mostly fought it, challenged the reports aggressively, tried to downplay the risks. Although, interestingly, the Bunker Hill Company itself seemed to recognize, internally at least, that its smelter was a health risk to employees as early as 1920. They even started this bizarre, unproven treatment called the Clegg electrolytic treatment. Workers would put their arms and legs in salt water, and they'd run a 110-volt current through it, supposedly to draw the lead out of their bodies.
Seriously, an electric current in salt water.
Yeah, shows you the kind of maybe desperation, or at least the state of understanding back then. Probably didn't do much. They also continued buying those smoke easements around the smelter, covered over 7,000 acres eventually, because the smelter wasn't just releasing lead, but huge amounts of sulfur dioxide, other pollutants. Residents from the 1930s, they remembered periods where they literally couldn't see blue sky because the air was so thick with smelter smoke. They even said rayon clothes, a popular fabric then, would just get destroyed, eaten away by the sulfur dioxide in the air.
Can't see blue sky. That's a powerful image. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. Post-World War II, mid-century. Did things finally start to change regarding pollution control?
Well, after the war, metal production boomed again, hit its peak in the mid-1960s. More production, more waste. But yes, environmental and health concerns did start to reemerge more strongly, and laws began to change. Slowly, you had the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, state laws like Idaho's Mining Waste Pollution Control Act in 1948. These started putting some pressure on the industry. By 1968, the rule was supposed to be that all the mill tailings, the waste sand, had to go into settling ponds, not directly into the river anymore. So a gradual shift towards regulation was happening.
Okay, progress, but slow. But then there was a major incident, wasn't there? A setback that led to a really acute health crisis.
There was a huge setback. In 1973, the main pollution control device at the Bunker Hill smelter, it was called a baghouse, basically a giant filter system. It was badly damaged in a fire. The company that owned it then, Gulf Resources, they made what seems like a purely economic and frankly cynical decision. They decided to just keep operating the smelter without the baghouse for almost a year while it was being repaired or replaced. The result was catastrophic emissions, up to 160 tons per month of particulate matter pouring out,
Right.
and 50 to 70% of that particulate was lead. An investigation later found that in Smelterville, the town right next to the smelter, an absolutely staggering 99% of the children tested had dangerously high blood lead levels. Levels of 40 micrograms per deciliter or higher, some of the highest ever recorded anywhere.
99%. That's almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
Horrifying. How did the community react to that kind of data? Surely that caused outrage.
You'd think so. But the reaction was complex and kind of troubling. Many residents actually remained, quote, unconcerned. There's a famous quote from one mother whose kids had very high lead levels saying, "There's nothing wrong with my kids." Denial, maybe. There was even a protest against closing a local elementary school near the smelter, even though air monitors there showed lead levels 10 times higher than the accepted safety standard. It really highlights that deep, difficult conflict you see in company towns, doesn't it? Economic dependence, the fear of losing jobs versus clear evidence of harm. It's a tough position for people to be in. Ultimately, though, the smelter couldn't sustain itself. It shut down in 1981, partly due to falling metal prices, more competition globally, but also the huge, immense cost of finally upgrading to meet modern environmental regulations. The closure meant a loss of 2,100 jobs, a huge blow to the local economy. But the environmental damage, the legacy of all that lead and other metals, that was already done.
So where does that leave the region today? What's the outcome of this century of mining, pollution, and conflict?
Well, the direct outcome was the Coeur River Basin being declared a Superfund site in 1983, one of the largest in the entire country. Is even expanded in 1998, now covers something like 1,500 square miles. That Superfund designation, that's the EPA stepping in for the most contaminated sites nationwide, requires massive long-term cleanup. The cleanup efforts there, they're projected to cost hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars, and take decades more to complete, maybe generations. So the legacy of the Silver Valley is this huge paradox, isn't it? It produced enormous wealth, over $26 billion worth of metals in today's money, making it the richest silver district globally. But the price was leaving behind one of the nation's biggest, most complex, and most expensive environmental and public health cleanup challenges, a challenge that will likely last longer than the mining boom itself.
What a story. From that pristine wilderness you described at the start to this industrial powerhouse, the site of brutal labor wars, and now a massive Superfund site. Burdened by its own success, in a way. It just makes you realize how deeply tied together everything is. The economy, social conflict, environmental health. They aren't separate issues.
Exactly. And it brings up that question we started with, doesn't it? When we look at things happening in a community today, even recent tragic events, how much can we really understand without digging into these deep layers of the past? The Coeur d'Alene story, I think, is just such a powerful reminder. Those battles fought over a century ago for workers' rights against corporate power, the slow, painful fight over environmental consequences. They leave this indelible mark. It's imprinted on the landscape itself, on the people shaping the character, maybe even the tensions of the place today.
Yeah, absolutely. The ground itself holds those echoes. The history of the Coeur d'Alene mining wars, it's not just something that happened, it feels like it's still present, casting this long shadow. A reminder that where we stand often carries the weight of profound struggles and transformations. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Coeur d'Alene region. We hope this historical context gives you, our listeners, maybe a deeper appreciation for the complex stories that shape our world, and perhaps encourages you to look for those historical echoes wherever you are.